You have 5 seconds to ruin the entire wedding. What would you do? Story 1. All right, so picture this. I'm standing at the back of this beautifully decorated hall, watching my cousin marry the love of his life. The ceremony is elegant, the music is lovely, and everyone is in high spirits. The officiant asks if anyone objects to the marriage, and there's a moment of silence, as there usually, but my mind is racing. And I remember this one little secret about the groom. See, a few months back, during a drunken night out, he confessed to me that he had cheated on the bride with her best friend. It was a one-time thing, he claimed, and he felt horrible about it. He begged me to keep it a secret, promising it was the biggest mistake of his life. But now, standing there, I can't get the image of the bride, my soon-to-be cousin-in-law, out of my mind. She's radiant, smiling with pure joy, completely unaware of this dark shadow hanging over her perfect day. The officiant asks again if anyone objects. I feel my heart pounding in my chest. My palms are sweaty, and before I know it, I'm standing up, blurting out, "I do." Every head in the hall snaps towards me. The bride looks confused. The groom looks like he's seen a ghost. I take a deep breath and say, "I'm sorry, but I can't let this wedding happen without telling the truth. He cheated on you with your best friend." Gasps. The murmurs, the chaos that followed. It was like a scene out of a movie. The bride's face crumpled in an instant, and she ran out of the hall, tears streaming down her cheeks. The groom tried to run after her, but her father intercepted him, yelling about what a piece of trash he was. Guests started whispering, taking sides, and it was absolute pandemonium. I walked out feeling both relieved and terrified at what I'd just done. But hey, sometimes you gotta do what's right, even if it ruins the whole wedding. Story 2. So, you wanna know how to ruin a wedding in 5 seconds? Here's what I did, I began, leaning back in my chair as my friends gathered around, curious and eager for a good story. My friend Mike was getting married, and he was marrying the absolute worst bridezilla I'd ever met. She was controlling, rude, and had driven everyone insane during the wedding planning. Everyone in our friend group secretly wished for a way to stop the wedding, but no one dared to do anything. The ceremony was in this grand church, beautifully decorated with flowers and ribbons. Everything was perfect, just as she had planned. The bride walked down the aisle, all smiles and radiance, and the ceremony began. The officiant asked if anyone had any objections, and a devilish idea popped into my head. I leaned over to Mike's younger brother, who was standing beside me, and whispered, "Hey, remember that prank we talked about? Now's the time." His eyes widened, but he trusted. With a quick nod, he stepped forward and said, "I object." The whole church went silent, and you could hear a pin drop. The bride looked like she was going to explode, and Mike turned a deep shade of red. But then, the kicker. Mike's brother continued, "I object to this wedding unless we get a group photo with everyone doing the chicken dance right now." For a moment, everyone just stared, and then Mike burst out laughing. He knew it was a prank, and the tension in the room shattered. Some people started chuckling, others looked relieved, and then, out of nowhere, someone started clucking. Within seconds, the entire wedding party and guests were clucking and flapping their arms like chickens. The bride was furious at first, but then even she couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. The wedding went on without a hitch after that. But it definitely wasn't the picture-perfect ceremony she had planned. And Mike, well, he thanked me later for breaking the ice and bringing everyone back down to earth. Story 3. All right, so this one's a bit different. My buddy Dave was getting married, and he was super nervous. Not about marrying his fiancée. She was amazing, but about giving the perfect speech at the reception. Dave was never good with public speaking, and he was stressing about it for weeks. The wedding day came, and everything was going smoothly. The ceremony was beautiful, and everyone was having a great time at the reception. When it was finally time for Dave to give his speech, he stood up trembling like a leaf. I could see him sweating, and I knew I had to do something to help. So just as he opened his mouth to speak, I jumped up and shouted, "Wait! Before Dave starts, I have a surprise for him." Everyone turned to look at me, and Dave's eyes were wide with confusion. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the speaker system. "Dave, remember that karaoke night we had last year? Well, I recorded your rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody, and I think everyone should hear it." Dave's face turned beet red as the familiar piano notes started playing. The recording wasn't just him singing, it was him butchering the song, hitting all the wrong notes and making up lyrics as he went along. The room was filled with laughter, and Dave's nervousness melted away. He joined in, laughing at himself. And when the song ended, he took the mic with a grin. "Well, after that performance, my speech can't possibly be worse." He went on to give a heartfelt, beautiful speech, and the rest of the night was perfect. The recording of his terrible karaoke performance became a legendary joke among our friends, and to this day, Dave thanks me for ruining the tension and making his speech memorable. Story 4. Let me set the scene. My sister's wedding, a beautiful garden ceremony with all the trimmings. Everything was going perfectly until I decided to have a bit of fun. See, my sister Jenna had this ex-boyfriend Kyle who was a bit of a jerk. He'd broken her heart, and everyone in the family knew how much she hated him. So naturally, I thought it would be hilarious to mess with her. The officiant got to the part where they ask if anyone has any objections, and I quickly slipped my phone out of my pocket. I had Kyle's number saved for emergencies or pranks like this. I hit the dial button and then put my phone on speaker. "Hey, Kyle, you there?" To my shock and horror, Kyle answered on the first ring. "Hey, what's up? Who's this?" Before I could hang up, Jenna's eyes zeroed in on me, and she recognized Kyle's voice immediately. Her face went from confusion to anger in a split second. "What the hell, Mike?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the garden. The guests gasped, and the groom looked like he was about to faint. I fumbled with my phone, trying to hang up, but my hands were shaking too much. Kyle's voice kept blabbering on, oblivious to the chaos he was causing. Jenna stormed over to me, yanked the phone out of my hand, and hurled it into the fountain nearby. "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed. "Why would you do that?" The guests were whispering. The groom was trying to calm Jenna down, and my parents looked like they were about to disown me. I stood there mortified, realizing that my little prank had gone way too far. The wedding eventually continued, but there was a noticeable tension in the air. Jenna and I didn't speak for months after, and every family gathering was awkward as hell. It was supposed to be a harmless joke, but it turned into a night story. So, my cousin Rachel was marrying this guy Tom, and they were the picture perfect. The wedding was held at this fancy hotel, and everything was going according to plan. But I knew something no one else did. Tom had a secret. About a month before the wedding, I accidentally found out that Tom had a gambling problem. He'd racked up a significant amount of debt, and he was hiding it from Rachel. I didn't know what to do with this information, but on the day of the wedding, I made a decision. During the reception, just as everyone was toasting to the happy couple, I took the mic. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" I said, my voice shaky but determined. Rachel and Tom looked at me, smiling, unaware of what was coming. "I just want to say something about Tom," I continued. "He's a great guy, and Rachel, you deserve to know everything about him before you start this new life together." Rachel's smile faltered, and Tom's eyes widened in panic. I took a deep breath and said, "Tom has a gambling problem. He's in debt, and he hasn't told you about it." The room fell silent. Rachel's face went pale, and she looked at Tom, who was now sweating bullets. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The guests started whispering, and Rachel's parents stood up, looking furious. Rachel ran out of the room, tears streaming down her face. Tom tried to go after her, but her father stopped him. "You've got some explaining to do," he said, his voice low and menacing. The rest of the night was a blur of arguments, tears, and accusations. The wedding was effectively ruined, and I was the one who had done it. Looking back, I wonder if there was a better way to handle it. But at the moment, I felt like I was doing the right thing. It wasn't my intention to destroy the wedding, but sometimes the truth has a way of ruining everything. Story 6. So there I was, sitting in the back pew of the church, dressed to the nines and feeling pretty good about myself. My best friend Tony was getting married to this amazing girl named Sarah. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind that makes you think love might actually be real. But I had a secret that could ruin everything. See, Tony and I had been friends since high school, and we'd always been there for each other. About a month before the wedding, Tony got drunk at his bachelor party and told me he wasn't sure he was ready to get married. He confessed he still had feelings for his ex, Lisa. I told him to sleep on it and see how he felt in the morning, but he never brought it up again. Now, during the wedding, I could see Tony standing at the altar looking nervous as hell. The officiant was saying the usual stuff, asking if anyone had any objections. My heart was pounding. I knew if I didn't say anything, Tony might regret it for the rest of his life. But if I did speak up, I'd ruin the best day of his life. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stood up, my legs shaking, and cleared my throat. "I have something to say." All eyes were on me. Tony's face turned white, and Sarah looked confused. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Man, I love you like a brother, but I can't let you do this if you're not sure." The room was silent. Tony looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and anger. "What the hell, Mike?" he said, his voice trembling. "I know you still have feelings for Lisa," I blurted out. "You told me at your bachelor party." Sarah's face crumpled, and she ran out of the church. Tony stood there frozen, and then he punched me hard. The guests started talking, the whispers growing louder, and the wedding turned into chaos. Tony and I didn't speak for months after. He and Sarah broke up, and he tried to make things work with Lisa, but it didn't last. Eventually, Tony and I patched things up, but our friendship was never quite the same. Sometimes doing the right thing can feel like the worst mistake. Story 7. My cousin Linda was getting married to this guy, Rick, who none of us liked. He was arrogant, always talking down to people, and we all thought she could do better. But she was head over heels for him, and nothing we said could change her mind. The wedding was a big, fancy affair at a country club. Everything was perfect. From the flowers to the music, I was one of the bridesmaids, and I could see how happy Linda was. It almost made me forget what a jerk Rick was. Almost. During the reception, Rick made this long-winded speech about how lucky he was to have Linda, how she was the love of his life, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't stand it. The more he talked, the more I wanted to wipe that smug smile off his face. And then I remembered something. About a month before the wedding, I'd seen Rick at a bar with another woman. They were all over each other, and it was clear it wasn't just a friendly night out. I'd confronted him about it, and he'd begged me not to tell Linda, swearing it was a one-time mistake. As Rick finished his speech, everyone clapped and cheered. I stood up, my heart racing, and grabbed the microphone. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice trembling. Rick's smile faltered, and Linda looked at me with confusion. "Rick isn't the man you think he is, Linda," I said. "A month ago, I saw him with another woman at a bar. They were kissing, and it was pretty clear they weren't just friends." The room went silent. Linda's face turned pale, and Rick's expression darkened. "That's not true," he shouted, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "It is true," I insisted. "I'm sorry, Linda, but you deserve to know the truth." Linda burst into tears and ran out of the reception hall. Rick tried to go after her, but her brothers blocked his way. The guests were whispering, and I felt a mix of guilt and relief wash over me. The wedding was ruined, and Linda called off the marriage. She thanked me later for telling her the truth, but it took a long time for our relationship to heal. Sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to tell. Story 8. Picture this, a picturesque beach wedding, the sun setting in the background, and everyone dressed in their finest summer attire. My good friend Kevin was marrying his longtime girlfriend Amanda. They were a great couple, but there was just one little issue. Kevin's ex-girlfriend Rachel had been invited to the wedding. Amanda insisted on it because they had all been friends for years, but I knew it was a bad idea. The ceremony was beautiful, and everyone was having a great time at the reception. But then, after a few too many drinks, Rachel started getting a little too friendly with Kevin. She kept laughing at his jokes, touching his arm, and giving him those looks. I could see Amanda watching from the other side of the room, her smile falter. I knew I had to do something before things got out of hand. So I grabbed the microphone and tapped it to get everyone's attention. "Hey everyone, can I have your attention for a second?" I said, my voice echoing through the speakers. "I just wanted to share a little story about our dear friend Kevin." Kevin looked at me, confused but smiled. Amanda's eyes were fixed on, and I could see the worry in her expression. "Remember that time we all went camping?" I began. "And Kevin and Rachel disappeared for a few hours?" "Well, Kevin told me they were just getting some firewood, but we all know what really happened." The room went silent, and Kevin's smile vanished. Rachel turned bright red, and Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "Kevin, man, you're a great guy, but you need to keep your past in the past. Amanda deserves better than to have her wedding day overshadowed by your old flame." Kevin tried to say something, but Amanda stood up and walked out of the reception. The guests started whispering, and Rachel looked like she wanted to disappear. The wedding was over, just like that. Amanda called off the marriage, and Kevin was left to pick up the pieces. It wasn't the way I wanted things to go, but sometimes the truth has a way of coming out, even when it's not convenient. Story 9. So there we were at my friend Sarah's wedding. She was marrying this guy, Ben, who seemed perfect in every way. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were heartfelt, and everyone was enjoying the reception. But there was something gnawing at me. A few weeks before the wedding, I'd overheard Ben talking to one of his friends about how he wasn't sure if he was really ready to settle down. He'd mentioned another woman, someone he'd been seeing on the side, and how he couldn't decide between her and Sarah. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I tell Sarah and ruin her big day? Or keep quiet and hope Ben sorted out his feelings? As the night went on, I kept drinking, trying to drown out my thoughts. Then, during the speeches, Ben's best man made a joke about Ben's wild side. The guests laughed, but I couldn't. I felt my anger boiling over. When it was my turn to speak, I couldn't hold back. "Hi, everyone. I began, my voice shaking. I'm not really good at speeches, but there's something I need to say. Ben's smile faded, and Sarah looked at me with concern. Ben, you and I have been friends for a while, and I've always thought you were a stand-up guy. I can't stand by and let you lie to Sarah. The room went dead silent. You told me you were seeing someone else, I continued. You said you weren't sure about marrying Sarah. She deserves to know the truth. Sarah's face crumpled, and she stood up, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ben tried to explain, but she shook her head and walked out of the reception. The guests were in shock, and I felt like the worst person in the world. The wedding was ruined, and Ben and Sarah broke up. It took a long time for Sarah to forgive me, but she eventually thanked me for telling her the truth. Sometimes doing the right thing feels like the hardest thing in the world. Story 10. So, my cousin Jenna was marrying this guy Mark, who I never really liked. He was always so smug and condescending, and I couldn't understand what she saw in him. But she was head over heels, and there was nothing I could do about it. The wedding was this lavish affair at a fancy hotel, with everything planned down to the last detail. Jenna looked stunning in her dress, and Mark was his usual overly confident self. I was seated near the back, watching the ceremony unfold, when I remembered something. A few months back, I'd seen Mark out with another woman. They were having dinner at a nice restaurant, and it didn't look like a business. They were holding hands, laughing, and there was definitely something going on between them. I never told Jenna because I didn't have any concrete proof, and I didn't want to cause unnecessary. But now, sitting there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. The officiant asked if anyone had any objections, and before I knew it, I was on my feet. I have something to say, I announced, my voice shaking. Jenna and Mark both looked at me, confused and concerned. I'm sorry to do this, I said, but I can't let Jenna marry someone who isn't being honest with me. Mark's face turned pale and Jenna's eyes widened. I saw Mark with another woman a few months ago, I continued. They were at a restaurant holding hands. It didn't look like a business meeting. The guests started whispering, and Jenna looked like she was about to faint. Mark tried to defend himself, but the damage was done. Jenna burst into tears and ran out of the hall, leaving Mark standing there, speechless. The wedding was ruined, and Jenna called off the marriage. She was devastated, but eventually she thanked me for telling her the truth. Mark never spoke to me again, but I didn't care. Sometimes you have to do what's right, even if it means ruining everything. Story 11. So this one's a bit wild. My brother Dave was marrying his college sweetheart Emily. Everyone loved Emily. She was sweet, smart, and genuinely cared about Dave. The wedding was this big, extravagant affair at a vineyard with beautiful flowers and a live band. Everything was perfect. Well, almost everything. See, about 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out that Dave had a bit of a problem. He'd racked up a huge amount of debt due to his secret gambling habit. I confronted him about it, and he begged me not to tell anyone, especially Emily. He promised he'd quit and pay off the debt, but I wasn't so. During the wedding, I kept replaying our conversation. I knew Emily deserved to know the truth before she committed, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin their special day. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. I couldn't let it go. I stood up and cleared my throat. I have something to say, I announced, my voice barely steady. Everyone turned to look at me, including Emily, who had a confused look on her face. Dave's expression turned to one of panic. I'm sorry to do this, but Emily, you need to know the truth. Dave has a gambling problem and he's in a lot of debt. The crowd gasped and Emily's eyes filled with tears. Dave, is this true? She asked, her voice trembling. Dave tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He just nodded, looking ashamed. Emily turned and ran down the aisle, her bridal gown trailing. Dave went after her, but her father intercepted him, shouting about how he would never let his daughter marry a liar. The wedding turned into chaos, with guests whispering and some of them leaving. I felt horrible, but I knew Emily deserved to know the truth. They eventually broke off the engagement, and Dave started going to therapy for his gambling addiction. It was a tough time, but sometimes the right is also the hardest. Story 12. All right, let me take you back to my friend Mike's wedding. Mike and Jessica were high school sweethearts, and everyone was thrilled for them. The ceremony was set in this beautiful garden, complete with fairy lights and a string quartet. It was like a scene out of a movie. But here's the thing, I knew a secret that could blow everything up. A few months before the wedding, Jessica had confessed to me that she had kissed another guy during a bachelorette party. It was a drunken mistake, she said, and she swore she regretted it. She made me promise not to tell Mike, and I reluctantly agreed. As the wedding day approached, the guilt started eating me up. I knew Mike deserved to know the truth, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin his happiness. During the ceremony, when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, my heart was pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice quivering. Jessica's face went pale and Mike looked at me with confusion. "Mike, buddy, you know I care about you," I started, "but there's something you need to know before you go through with this." Jessica's eyes pleaded with me to stop, but I couldn't. "Jessica kissed another guy at her bachelorette party," I blurted out. "It was a mistake and she regrets it, but you deserve to know the truth." The garden went silent. Mike's expression went from confusion to hurt, and then to anger. Jessica burst into tears and Mike just stood there, looking like his world had crumbled around him. The guests started whispering, and some of them looked at me like I was the villain. Mike turned and walked away, and Jessica ran after him, sobbing. The ceremony was over, and the wedding was... Mike and Jessica eventually worked things out, but it took a lot of time and effort. They thanked me later for being honest, but it was a painful experience for everyone involved. Sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to face, but it's better than living a lie. Story 13. All right, here's one for the books. My friend Greg was marrying this girl, Lisa, who was just perfect, or so we thought. The wedding was this huge event with guests flying in from all over the country. It was held at this gorgeous old mansion with chandeliers and a live jazz band. It was the kind of wedding you'd see in a magazine. But a few weeks before the wedding, I found out something that made my stomach turn. I was at a bar, and I saw Lisa with another guy. They were cozy, too cozy for just friends. I watched them for a while, and it was clear they were more than just acquaintances. I took a few photos with my phone just in case. I debated for days whether or not he was my best friend, but I didn't want to destroy his happiness. When the wedding day came, I still hadn't decided, but as the ceremony went on, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. The officiant asked if anyone had any objections, and I felt like I was going to throw up. I stood up, my hands shaking, and said, "I have something to say." Greg and Lisa looked at me confused. "Greg, I saw Lisa with another guy a few weeks ago," I said, holding up my phone with the photos. "I didn't want to believe it, but you deserve to know the truth." Lisa's face turned white, and Greg looked at her, hurt and confused. "Is this true?" he asked. Lisa started crying, and Greg's face turned to stone. The guests started murmuring, and the whole atmosphere changed. Greg walked away, and Lisa tried to follow him, but he just shook. The wedding was over. Greg thanked me later for telling him the truth, but it was a painful experience for everyone. Sometimes doing the right thing means causing a lot of pain, but it's better than letting someone live a lie. Story 14. So, my cousin Beth was marrying this guy James, and everyone thought they were the perfect couple. The wedding was this grand event at a luxurious hotel with everything planned down to the last detail. But there was a dark secret that only a few of us knew. About a year before the wedding, James had been arrested for a DUI. He managed to keep it quiet, and only a handful of people knew about it, including me. He'd promised Beth he'd changed, but I wasn't so. During the ceremony, I kept thinking about how Beth deserved to know the truth. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to say something. I stood up, my legs shaking, and said, "I have something to say." Beth and James both looked at me confused. "Beth, there's something you need to know about James. He was arrested for a DUI last year. He promised he'd changed, but I think you deserve to know before you go through with this." The guests gasped, and Beth's face turned pale. "James, is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. James tried to defend himself, but the damage was done. Beth burst into tears and ran out of the room. The guests started whispering, and the whole atmosphere turned tense. The wedding was over. Beth called off the marriage, and James was left to deal with the fallout. It was a tough decision, but I knew Beth deserved to know the truth. Sometimes, doing the right thing means causing a lot of pain, but it's better than living a lie. Story 15. All right, let me tell you about my friend Alex's wedding. Alex was marrying this amazing girl, Megan, and everyone was excited for them. The wedding was held at this beautiful old church with stained glass windows and a stunning view. It was perfect. Well, almost. A few months before the wedding, Megan had confided in me that she wasn't sure if she was ready to get married. She loved Alex, but she felt like something was missing. She asked me not to tell anyone, and I promised I wouldn't. But as the wedding day approached, I could see the doubt in her. During the ceremony, when the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, I felt like my heart was going to burst. I knew I couldn't let Megan go through with something she wasn't sure about. I stood up, my hands shaking, and said, "I have something to say." Alex and Megan looked at me, confused and worried. "Megan, you told me you weren't sure if you were ready to get married," I said. "I can't let you go through with this if you're not certain." The guests gasped, and Megan's face turned red. "Alex, I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, but I don't know if I'm ready." Alex looked devastated, and the guests started whispering. Megan ran out of the church, and Alex followed her, but the damage was done. The wedding was over. Alex and Megan broke up, but they both thanked me later for being honest. It was a painful experience, but sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to face. Story 16. So there I was at my cousin Jake's wedding. Jake and Olivia were a match made in heaven, or so everyone thought. The ceremony was held at this stunning vineyard, and everything was perfect. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. It was like a scene from a fairy tale, but here's the twist. Jake's ex, Laura, was still hung up on it. She and Jake had dated for years before Olivia came into the picture, and Laura never really moved on. She was invited to the wedding because, well, they all ran in the same social circles, and it would have been awkward to leave her out. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and everyone moved to the reception. The band was playing, people were dancing, and the atmosphere was electric. I was mingling, trying to avoid Laura, who had been giving me the stink eye all night. See, Laura knew that I knew about her lingering feelings for Jake, and she wasn't too happy about it. Then it happened. During the best man speech, which was heartfelt and beautiful, Laura stumbled up to the mic, clearly having had one too many drinks. "I have something to say," she slurred, grabbing the mic. The room fell silent. Jake and Olivia looked at her in shock. "Jake, you know we were meant to be together." "Olivia's great and all, but she's not me," Laura blurted out, her voice cracking. Olivia's face went from confused to furious. Jake stood up, trying to get the mic away from Laura, but she wouldn't let go. "I love you, Jake. I always have," she continued, tears streaming down her face. Guests started whispering, and Olivia ran out of the room, her friends following close behind. Jake finally got the mic from Laura and handed it back to the best man. "I'm so sorry, everyone," he said, his voice shaking. "I need to go find Olivia." The wedding was in shambles. Jake ran after Olivia, leaving the guests to awkwardly sip their drinks and pretend nothing had happened. Laura was escorted out, still sobbing, and I felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Jake and Olivia managed to patch things up eventually, but their wedding day was forever marred by Laura's drunken confession. Sometimes the past has a way of crashing in the most spectacular. Story 17. All right, this one's a doozy. My buddy Nick was marrying his fiancée Claire, and it was supposed they had rented this gorgeous estate, complete with a lake and beautiful gardens. Everything was meticulously planned, down to the last detail. Now, Nick's ex-girlfriend Tina was still in the picture. Not because he wanted her there, but because their families were close. And it would have been a big deal to uninvite her. Tina had always been a bit unstable, and everyone was a little on edge about her being there. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire looked stunning, and Nick was beaming. The vows were exchanged, and they were pronounced husband and wife. Everyone cheered, and it seemed like nothing could go wrong. But during the reception, things took a turn. Tina had been drinking heavily, and she was getting louder and more obnoxious by the minute. I was keeping an eye on her, just in case, when she suddenly stood up and shouted, "I have something to say." The room went silent, and all eyes turned to her. She staggered up to the front where Nick and Claire were sitting. "Nick, you can't marry her. You belong with me," she said, her voice wavering. Claire's face turned red with anger, and Nick looked horrified. "Tina, please, just go home," Nick said, trying to keep his voice calm, but Tina wasn't having it. "No! Everyone needs to know that we were together first, and you promised me we'd be together forever," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. Claire stood up, glaring at Tina. "You need to leave, now," she said, her voice icy. Tina tried to argue, but a couple of groomsmen stepped in and gently escorted her out. The guests were left in stunned silence, and the happy atmosphere was shattered. Nick and Claire managed to salvage the rest of the evening, but it was clear that Tina's outburst had cast a shadow over their special day. Sometimes, the past just can't stay buried, no matter how hard you try. Story 18. Let me tell you about my cousin Liz's wedding. Liz and Tom had been together for years, and their wedding was the talk of the town. It was held at this beautiful historic mansion with elegant decorations and a live orchestra. It was the kind of wedding that little girls dream about. But here's the kicker. Tom's best man, Jack, had been secretly in love with Liz for as long as anyone could remember. He never acted on it because he valued his friendship with Tom, but it was an open secret among their close friends. The ceremony went smooth, and everyone was enjoying the reception. The food was delicious, the drinks were flowing, and the dance floor was packed. Then it was time for the speeches. Jack was up first, and everyone was eager to hear what he had to say. Jack started off well enough talking about his friendship with Tom and how happy he was for him, but then his tone changed. "Tom, you're a lucky guy. Liz is amazing." "She's everything I've ever wanted in a woman," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. The room fell silent, and Tom and Liz exchanged worried glances. I've loved Liz for as long as I can remember, and it's been the hardest thing in the world to watch her with you, Jack continued, tears streaming down his face. Tom stood up, looking furious. Jack, this isn't the time or place, he said, his voice low and threatening, but Jack wasn't done. I just needed to get this off my chest. Liz, you deserve the world, and I hope Tom can give it to you, he said, before walking off the stage and out of the reception. The guests were in shock, and Liz looked like she was about to cry. Tom tried to comfort her, but the damage was done. The rest of the night was tense, with everyone whispering about Jack's confession. Tom and Liz managed to move past it, but Jack's speech had left a scar. Sometimes, unspoken feelings have a way of coming out at the worst possible moments. Story 19. All right, so my best friend Sarah was getting married to this guy Ryan. They were perfect together, and everyone was thrilled for them. The wedding was at this beautiful lakeside venue, with fairy lights and flowers everywhere. It was like something out of a dream. But there was a secret hanging over the whole event. Ryan's sister Jenny had never liked Sarah. She thought Sarah was too controlling and had made it clear she didn't approve of the marriage. She kept her distance during the wedding planning, but she showed up on the big day looking tense. The ceremony was lovely, and everyone moved to the reception, which was held in a big tent by the lake. The speeches were going well until it was Jenny's turn. She got up looking nervous and took the mic. I have something to say, she began, her voice shaking. Sarah and Ryan looked at her, curious but wary. Ryan, you're my brother, and I love you, but I can't stay silent any longer. Sarah, you've always tried to control everything and everyone around you. I don't think you're right for my brother, Jenny said, her voice growing strong. The room fell silent. Sarah's face turned red, and Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear. Jenny, this isn't the time, Ryan said, trying to keep his voice calm, but Jenny wasn't done. No, Ryan. You need to hear this. I've watched you change since you've been with Sarah, and not for the better. She's not the person you should be spending the rest of your life with, Jenny continued, tears in her eyes. Sarah stood up, her hands clenched into fists. You need to leave, Jenny, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Jenny was escorted out by one of the groomsmen, and the reception continued, but the mood was ruined. Ryan spent the rest of the night trying to comfort Sarah, but it was clear the damage was done. Sarah and Ryan stayed together, but Jenny's outburst had cast a long shadow over their wedding. Sometimes family tensions can erupt in the most spectacularly awful ways. Story 20. So my coworker Mark was marrying his fiancée Emily, and they invited the whole office. The wedding was at this fancy country club, and everything was top-notch. The ceremony was beautiful, and the reception was in full swing with a live band and an open bar. Now, Mark had this rival at work, Steve, who always seemed to be competing with him for promotions and Steve was also invited, and he brought his girlfriend, who was quite the party. The open bar was a dangerous combination for Steve. During the reception, as everyone was having a great time, Steve got more and more drunk. He kept making snide comments about Mark to anyone who would listen, but most people just ignored him. But then, during the toasts, Steve couldn't hold back any longer. Mark's best man had just finished his speech and everyone was clapping. Steve stumbled up to the mic, grabbing it before anyone could stop. I have something to say, he slurred, swaying on his feet. The room went silent, and Mark and Emily looked at him in horror. Mark, you've always been a brown-noser at work, and now you're getting married to this uptight princess, Steve said, pointing at Emily. Emily's face turned red, and Mark looked ready to explode. Steve, get off the stage, Mark said through gritted teeth. But Steve wasn't done. You think you're better than everyone, but you're not. Emily, you have no idea what you're getting into, he continued, laughing drunkenly. Security finally stepped in and escorted Steve out, but the damage was done. The guests were whispering, and the festive mood was shattered. Mark and Emily tried to salvage the evening, but it was clear that Steve's outburst had cast a dark cloud over their... Mark filed a complaint with HR, and Steve was fired a few weeks later. The wedding fiasco was the final straw. Sometimes people's true colors show at the worst possible time, and it's a lesson in how not to handle jealousy and resentment. Story 21. All right, so this was my sister Laura's wedding. She was marrying this great guy named Matt, and everyone was really happy. The wedding was held at this beautiful countryside inn with rolling hills and blooming flowers. It was perfect, except there was one small problem. Laura's ex, Chris, was still in love with her. Chris and Laura had dated for a few years before she met Matt, and he never really got over it. Chris was invited to the wedding because Laura wanted to stay friends, and she didn't think it would be a big deal. The ceremony was beautiful, and everyone moved to the reception. The atmosphere was joyful with laughter and dancing. But then, during the toasts, Chris got up and asked to say a few words. Everyone turned to look at him, and I could see Laura's face tighten with anxiety. Chris took the mic, looking a little tipsy. Laura, you and I have known each other for a long time, he began, his voice wavering, and I've always thought we were meant to be together. A hush fell over the room. Matt's smile vanished, and Laura looked horrified. Doing? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, but Chris ignored her. Matt, guy. But I need to tell Laura, he continued, tears streaming down his face. Laura, I never stopped. The guests started murmuring, and I could see some of them exchanging worried glances. Matt stood up, looking furious. Chris, this isn't the time or place, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Chris looked around, realizing too late that he had made a huge mistake. He dropped the mic and walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Laura burst into tears, and Matt wrapped his arms around her, trying to comfort her. The wedding was tainted by Chris's confession, and it took a while for Laura and Matt to recover from the shock. They eventually moved on, but the memory of that day was always a little bittersweet. Sometimes unresolved feelings can erupt at the worst possible moments, and there's no easy way to handle them. Story 22. So, my friend Becky was marrying her boyfriend Tom at this beautiful beachside resort. The setting was perfect, with the sound of waves crashing in the background and a stunning sunset. Everyone was excited, and the atmosphere was filled with love and happiness. But there was a secret that only a few of us knew. Becky's maid of honor, Lisa, had been having an affair with Tom. It had started months ago, and although Lisa swore it was over, the guilt was eating her up. I found out about it because Lisa confided in me one night, crying her eyes out. During the ceremony, I kept glancing at Lisa, who looked like she was about to faint. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, Lisa's hand shot up. My heart stopped, and I could see Becky and Tom looking at her in shock. I have something to say, Lisa said, her voice trembling. Becky, I'm so sorry. I have to tell you the truth. Tom and we had an affair. The guests gasped, and Becky's face turned white. Tom looked like he had been punched in the gut. Lisa, what are you doing? Tom said, his voice filled with panic. I can't live with this lie anymore, Lisa continued, tears streaming down her face. Becky, you deserve to know the truth. Becky stood there, frozen, and then she turned and ran down the aisle, her bridesmaids following. Tom tried to go after her, but Becky's father stopped him, his face red with anger. The wedding was over, just like that. The guests were left in stunned silence, and Lisa was escorted out by one of the grooms. Becky called off the marriage, and it took her a long time to recover from the betrayal. Sometimes the truth can be devastating, but it's better than living a lie. Story 23. My buddy Mike was getting married to his girlfriend Jen. They had this beautiful wedding planned at a rustic barn venue, with twinkling fairy lights and a cozy atmosphere. Everything was perfect, and everyone was looking forward to celebrating their love. But here's the twist. Mike's sister, Katie, had always been a bit of a wild card. She was known for her dramatic flair and had a tendency to speak her mind, no matter the consequences. And she had a grudge against Jen. She thought Jen was too controlling and didn't treat Mike right. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and everyone moved to the reception. The atmosphere was electric, with laughter and dancing. But then, during the speeches, Katie stood up, looking determined. I have something to say, she announced, grabbing them. The room fell silent, and Mike and Jen looked at her, puzzled. Mike, you're my brother, began, her voice steady. Can't stay silent. Jen, you've been trying to control every aspect of Mike's life, and I don't think you're right for him. Jen's face turned red, and Mike looked stunned. Katie, this isn't the time, Mike said, trying to keep his voice calm. But Katie wasn't done. Oh, Mike, you need to hear this. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, not someone who tries to change you, she continued, tears in her eyes. The guests started whispering, and the festive mood was shattered. Jen stood up, her hands clenched into fists. You need to leave, Katie, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Katie was escorted out by one of the groomsmen, and the reception continued, but the mood was tense. Mike spent the rest of the night trying to comfort Jen, but it was clear that Katie's outburst had cast a shadow over their special day. Mike and Jen eventually worked things out, but Katie's speech left a scar. Sometimes family tensions can erupt in the most spectacularly awful ways, and there's no easy way to handle them. Story 24. So, my cousin Sarah was marrying this guy Dave, who seemed perfect in every way. The wedding was at this gorgeous country estate with beautiful gardens and a lovely gazebo where the ceremony was held. Everything was planned to perfection. But here's the thing. Dave's ex-girlfriend, Melissa, was still in love with him. She was invited to the wedding because she was friends with a lot of people in the bridal party, and no one wanted to leave her out. Melissa had been trying to get over Dave, but it was clear she was struggling. The ceremony went smoothly, and everyone moved to the reception. The atmosphere was festive, with music and dancing. But then, during the toasts, Melissa stood up looking pale but determined. "I have something to say," she announced, grabbing the mic. The room fell silent, and Sarah and Dave looked at her, confused. "Dave, we were together for a long time and I still love you," Melissa said, her voice trembling. "I know it's too late, but I needed to tell you." Sarah's face turned red, and Dave looked horrified. "Melissa, please, this isn't the time," Dave said, trying to keep his voice calm. But Melissa wasn't done. "Sarah, you're amazing, and I'm sorry for this, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore," she continued, tears streaming down her face. The guests started whispering, and the festive mood was shattered. Sarah stood up, her hands shaking. "You need to leave, Melissa," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Melissa was escorted out by one of the groomsmen, and the reception continued, but the atmosphere was tense. Dave spent the rest of the night trying to comfort Sarah, but it was clear that Melissa's confession had cast a shadow over their special day. Sarah and Dave eventually moved on, but Melissa's outburst left a mark. Sometimes unresolved feelings can come out at the worst possible moments, and there's no easy way to handle them. Story 25. All right, so my friend Tom was marrying his fiancée Anna at this stunning mountaintop resort. The ceremony was breathtaking, with a panoramic view of the mountains and a clear blue sky. Everything was perfect, and everyone was excited to celebrate their love. But there was a problem. Tom's best man, Chris, had been harboring a secret crush on Anna for years. He never acted on it because he valued his friendship with Tom, but it was an open secret among their close friends. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and everyone moved to the reception. The atmosphere was electric, with laughter and dancing. But then, during the speeches, Chris stood up, looking nervous but determined. "I have something to say," taking the mic. The room fell silent, and Tom and Anna looked at him puzzled. "Tom, you're my best friend, and I love you like a brother. But there's something I need to get off my chest," Chris said, his voice. "Anna, I've been in love with you for as long as I can remember." Anna's face turned red, and Tom looked stunned. "Chris, this isn't the time," Tom said, trying to keep his voice calm. But Chris wasn't done. "I just needed to tell you, Anna, you're amazing, and I hope Tom can give you the happiness you deserve," he continued, tears in his eyes. The guests started whispering, and the festive mood was shattered. Anna looked like she was about to cry, and Tom just stood there, unable to speak. Chris handed the mic back and walked out of the reception, leaving a stunned silence. Tom and Anna tried to salvage the evening, but it was clear that Chris's confession had cast a long shadow over their speech. Tom and Anna eventually moved on, but Chris's speech left a scar. Sometimes, unspoken feelings have a way of coming out at the worst possible moments, and there's no easy way to handle. Story 26. All right, so my friend Kate was getting married to this guy named Rob, and they decided to have a big, beautiful wedding at this charming old church. Everything was meticulously planned, right down to the handmade decorations and the exquisite floral arrangement. It was the kind of wedding you'd see in a bridal magazine. But there was a problem. Rob's younger brother, Eric, was a bit of a loose cannon. He was always making inappropriate jokes and getting into trouble. Kate and Rob had decided to include him as one of the groomsmen, hoping he'd behave for the big day. The ceremony went smoothly, and everyone moved to the reception. The atmosphere was filled with joy and celebration, with people dancing and enjoying themselves. But then, during the toasts, Eric decided it was his time to shine. "I have something to say," Eric announced, grabbing the mic. The room fell silent, and Kate and Rob looked at him apprehensive. "You're my brother," Eric began, his voice slurring slightly from the drinks he'd had. "But there's something you need to know about Kate." The tension in the room was palpable. "Eric, don't," Rob said, his voice filled with warning. But Eric continued, "A few years ago, Kate and we hooked up at that party. You know the one," he said, looking around the room. The guests gasped, and Kate's face turned beet red. "Eric, you're drunk. Stop it," she said, her voice trembling. Rob looked stunned, and the guests started whispering amongst themselves. "I thought you should know, man. It's better you hear it from me," Eric slurred before stumbling off the stage. The festive mood was shattered. Kate ran out of the room, and Rob followed her, leaving the guests in a state of shock. The wedding was effectively ruined, and Eric was escorted out of the venue by a couple of other grooms. Rob and Kate eventually worked through, but Eric's outburst left a lasting impact on their relationship. Sometimes, family members can cause the most damage, and there's no easy way to repair. Story 27. My friend Danny was marrying his girlfriend Lily at this quaint little chapel in the countryside. The whole event was like something out of a fairy tale, with charming decorations and an intimate setting. Everything was going perfect, but there was one issue. Danny's ex, Carla, was still in love with him. They had dated for a long time before breaking up, and Carla had a hard time moving on. Danny invited her to the wedding out of courtesy, not realizing the emotional bomb it would set off. The ceremony was beautiful, and everyone moved to the reception, which was held in a large rustic barn. The mood was festive, with people dancing and celebrating. But then, during the speeches, Carla decided to take the mic. "I have something to say," Carla announced, her voice shaking. The room fell silent, and Danny and Lily turned to look at her surprised. "Danny, you and I have a history, and I've tried to move on, but I can't," Carla began, tears streaming down her face. "I still love you, and I can't stand by and watch you marry someone else." Lily's face turned pale, and Danny looked horrified. "Carla, this isn't the time," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. But Carla continued, "Lily, you're wonderful, and I'm sorry, but I had to say this. Danny, if you still have any feelings for me, please don't go through with this," she pleaded. The guests were in shock, and the festive mood evaporated. Lily stood up, her hands shaking. "You need to leave, Carla," she said, her voice barely steady. Carla was escorted out by one of the groomsmen, and the reception continued. But the atmosphere was tense. Danny spent the rest of the night trying to reassure Lily, but it was clear that Carla's confession had cast a shadow over their special day. Danny and Lily eventually moved on, but Carla's outburst left a scar. Sometimes unresolved emotions can erupt at the worst possible moment.